I'll just record there. There you go.
All right. All right. So let's mute everyone except Cory, and then we'll start.
All right. Now, how do I snag control here?
I'll stop presenting.
Yeah.
That's better.
Give me a second, Cory, and I will mute everybody, and then I will give you control. Get rid of that. There you go. And let me see if I can find you. And then I can also let you talk. Go ahead, Cory. You should be good.
All right, everybody. You can hear me? Thumbs up since you're muted works. All right, the head nod works well too. Yeah, so Eric asked me if I'd be willing to sort of do this presentation that I've done for the CHA and for the Van Brewers on recipe design. Usually it's a bit of a mix between recipe design and competition brewing. I pulled out some of the competition brewing stuff. I thought it might be a bit repetitive, but if there are any questions about it, during or at the end, by all means, please feel free to fire whatever questions you have. Just sort of a warning or a disclaimer before I get cracking on this, which is this is just what works for me. I have lots of different, and I'm sure all of you have different homebrewing friends, and everybody seems to have a different process or way about going and doing things. So this is just sort of my process and what really seems to work for me. So may not work for you. Hopefully it does if you need it. So I started brewing 7 years ago. I'm originally from Vancouver. I moved out to Oakville, about 10 years ago now. And I was there for about 5 years. And that's where I really started homebrewing. I needed something to do. So that's where I sort of got into it. Started doing some homebrew competitions here and there. And then when I moved back home here in Vancouver, I realized there was a Brewer of the Year circuit. I didn't even know it existed. So then that really kind of got me going and really shifting gears on the homebrewing hobby, if you will. So from 2015 to now really is when I've been sort of pushing the competitive homebrewing side of things. So I've done fairly well so far, and I get a kick out of it. So that's sort of my my credentials up to now. Just on a note on competitions that, it's just for fun. I find competitions to be a really great way to get engaged in the hobby, to learn about homebrewing, and to really just understand beer and all the different components, whether it's, yeast management, water, recipe design, you name it. It's sort of a fun way to start calibrating those sorts of things. And I find that the competitive homebrewing community is such a great community across the country. The big piece of advice I'd give to anyone who's looking to get into it is just get connected to that community. For me, it was doing it through Twitter. I find there's a lot of homebrewers across the country that use Twitter to sort of, tweet results, trash talk, have fun, or whatever it is. And it's a blast. It's a lot of fun. So anybody who's not doing that and wants to, feel free to follow me, and you're welcome to DM me anytime that you want. I post stupid stuff and good stuff too sometimes. But I've just found that being so useful in traveling across the country. What's been great is that through that community, I've been able to sort of land in any given city and have beers with homebrewers. And it's been one of my favorite times, to be honest with you. And funny enough, when I first won the Brewer of the Year trophy, I went to Calgary and through work, and I just happened to be there, and I met the previous year's Brewer of the Year. And it was maybe one of the best homebrewing experiences of my life. Not that we made beer, but I'd never actually met him before. And we sat down, and he invited me into his house in his basement to give me the trophy. And we sat and had beers for like 8 hours, like we'd known each other our whole life. And it was a really crazy, cool experience. And we just known each other through Twitter up to that point. So that's sort of my competition bit. And I'm just going to sort of move on to recipe design and how it goes for me. For me, really, the recipe sort of starts weird. It just sort of starts as an idea and something I start thinking about. And then it sort of starts to ruminate in my mind. I can't get rid of it. It sort of takes hold. And the only way for me to really get rid of the idea to stop bugging me is to brew it. And then I kind of get it out of my system. So an idea will come up. I want to do that. I've never done one of those before. Or, I have a weird idea for something. And then it starts the process. And from there, the process of planning and research starts. So for me, probably what I think is the most important part of the whole homebrewing process is really everything that you do up until before brew day. All the planning, all the research, all the sort of ingredient, selection, everything that you're doing, to me, it's the most important thing. And I never fly by the seat of my pants. I never just wake up and say, today I'm going to make something. Usually it's a few weeks. Like, I get a kick out of the planning and sort of doing all that research. So I almost never substitute things. I have to have exactly what I planned on having, because I want that beer to be exactly what I was trying to make. So it's a lot of fun for me, that brew planning design. I just think it's a part that a lot of brewers see as a nuisance or a pain in the butt or something they need to skip. And there's a lot of fun to be had in that part of the process, a lot of anticipation and things that you get out of it. So to me, it's the most important part in making really good beer. So the other piece is, you can have a great recipe and you're cutting corners. You're just not going to make the beer you could have. So just take the time to do it right. And that's probably the best, for me, that's a really important piece of advice. When I talk to brewers, I'll hear all the time, well, you don't need to do that, or you don't need to do that. But you have all these incremental decisions that you make when you're making your beer. And if you just take the time to do it the right way, or to do it the better way, or the way that gives you the better results, at the end of the day, you're going to be happy with what you have, because you're going to be stuck with the beer for the next 3 or 4 months, or depending on how fast you drink your beer. It could have been that much better. So resources and tools. So talk about the research and the planning phase for me. So from a books perspective, I sort of have my core set of books that I use: Designing Great Beers by Ray Daniels, Brewing Classic Styles. I think everyone has that. Brewing Better Beer is a great book too, especially for beginners, I find. And Modern Homebrew Recipes it's not a new book, but it's relatively new. But I really love the format of that recipe book. I find it's probably one of the better ones, because what he'll do is he'll explain the recipe, but then he'll say, here's what it should taste like, here's why I did it that way, and here's some variations you can try. And I've just found it to be really useful, because you sort of get into the mind of someone like Gordon Strong, and you sort of understand how they're putting these things together. And there's a lot to be learned from that. I have a lot of homebrewing friends that don't use recipe design tools. I swear by them. I wouldn't trust myself to not use it. So I use Beersmith for myself to build my recipes. And then I use Brewer's Friend to determine my pitch rates and pH estimates. I found that Brewer's Friend is really good for guessing pH. And it's a good pitch rate tool too. And if anybody out there isn't using any tools, Brewer's Friend has a fairly, we call it comprehensive, free program that you can use and get all the things that you need out of it. And I know a lot of good brewers and van brewers just use the free one and get really, really good results out of it. But I personally can't stress enough using a recipe design tool. They're only like 20 or 30 bucks, and they're well worth the investment. So I come up with an idea for a beer that I want to make. Then I start doing the research. I go through my books, and then I start combing websites. So I started looking at the Homebrew Talk forum. I found a really great forum for recipes and learning things about yeasts. Sometimes I'll look up a yeast on those websites, and you'll start getting performance sort of ranges on what temperatures people have used, or pitch rates, things like that. So I'll start doing research through there. American Homebrewing Association is a really good one too. I think that's probably now my go-to for learning that, and it's got a lot of really good recipes and baseline recipes that you can start from there. The BCJP app for reference. So I start sort of referencing if it's tied to a style that I'm trying to brew, then I'll start sort of looking at that. And I keep going back to that every couple of days, kind of making sure that the decisions that I'm making or sort of the directions that I'm going are sort of on the right path. And then for those of you that haven't seen it, one of our van brewers, Alex Cochran, is a great brewer. He has his own website where he does a blog on recipe design, and it's really good. It is really good. So I would, if you haven't seen it before, go check it out. He's a great writer, and he is really a world-class home brewer. So check that out. And then people. So then I start sort of bouncing my ideas off of people. So usually local club members, other Brewer of the Year's competitors through Twitter, usually, funny enough. So I'll start, DMing friends that I've made through Twitter that might live, anywhere across the country. Say, hey, what do you think about this ingredient? Or have you ever tried this? Or how'd you go about this? I'll start asking questions. And then I don't know if this is finally, but from a resources perspective, the buddy system. So I have a group of, I'll call it tight-knit friends that are fairly high-level brewers that I'll text and bounce those ideas off, and we share our beers. We'll get together every couple of months. We'll sit and we'll talk. We'll bring some of our beers that we're curious about and we want some feedback on. And I found that from a feedback and design perspective, in terms of actually getting to the end of the process and, did I get what I wanted, sharing it with that group and having a tight group like that is just so valuable. And it's something that you shouldn't miss out on. I mean, we have our beer shares at our Vancouver meetings as well. But I find just sort of, having 3 or 4 of us just sitting around a table and then going through some of our beers and sharing them and talking, I think that's probably where I've learned the most, not just in what do you think about my beers, but sharing theirs and giving them feedback and tasting their beers and how they're going. And then how did you get this flavor, or how did you do this and what yeast did you use? And then understanding sort of how they're applying it to the process. So it starts with an idea for style. Do commercial examples exist? So when it comes to the research, if it's a standard style, then I'll start going out, seeing if I can find commercial examples of that style, and I'll bring them home. I'll get good, high-end versions, and I'll get low-end versions. I'll try and get a whole range, and I'll start tasting them, and I'll start making notes on what I like and what I don't like. And if it's a particular, brand of beer, I'll start doing research on that brand of beer if I really like how it was made, and see if I can find clone recipes and if I can find information to get me closer to that range if that's what I'm after. Talk about the BCJP guidelines, reference book. So I start jumping into that website, and it's almost pretty much in this order. Then I start getting into what ingredients do I want to use. So I go through my whole recipe design. I've done my research. I've done all this other stuff. And now it's, I get my recipe out. Now, what ingredients am I going to use? Because I find, I have preferences when it comes to yeast, grain, and hops and things that I like to use. So I'll start sort of playing with that. And I think I have a fairly good gauge on the differences in some of the different maltsters, even though it might be, Munich, but from 2 different maltsters. What's the difference between them and that sort of thing. So I kind of know which ones I like and which ones I don't. So I'll start selecting depending on the style. Even when it comes down to something simple like Pilsner malt, I have preferences depending on what type of beer I'm making, what Pilsner malt I'll use. Then I get a first cut of my recipe, and then I'll share it with my friends. So we talked about sort of the buddy system. I'll start sharing my recipe, and they'll start telling me I'm stupid, or that's a terrible idea, or I use that, it worked really well. You'll get sort of different levels of feedback, and depending on how strong that feedback is, it might sort of influence how I tweak it over the next couple of weeks before I actually brew it. Then I suggest the recipe and sort of finalize what it is I'm actually going to do, and I've committed to it. Then I brew it. I don't shorten the process like we talked about earlier. If it's a doppelbock, then I'm going to decoct it. Whatever it is, I'm going to try and make it the best beer that I can, because I'm going to invest that, whatever it is, 4 to 6 hours on brew day to do this stupid thing. I want to make sure it comes out. I want to make sure I get the most and the best beer out of it that I can. Then I wait. I give my beer quite a bit of time. Like, I'll give it a month or 2 before I'll start really seriously testing it, because I want the beer to be sort of ready and know what it is before I taste it. I find, for me anyway, when I drink beers too early, I start getting weird, or maybe I start making incorrect assumptions on what that beer is going to be and what direction it's going to go. I'm better off just sort of letting it condition properly before it's ready. And then I rebrew it and I compare it. So I'll taste it. I'll make notes. I'll bottle off a few and save them for later. And then when I make another version later, I'll test them against each other and see, I'll tweak 1 or 2 things. I usually don't do, when I rebrew something, I won't redo a whole beer and start from the ground up. I'll just tweak maybe 1 or 2 variables. And then I'll taste it the next time and see what I like and what I don't like about it. And then I'll just make another tweak if I need to. So I'm always sort of screwing around with my beers. At some point, I'll ruin it, and then I'll go back to my last version. But that's sort of the way I like to do it. I'm always sort of comparing them, though, and making mental notes on what they are and what I like and what I don't like about them. Sweet fade. Use recipe design tool like Beersmith. A tip we talked about: when possible, plan. Whipping a recipe together is fine. It's just not going to be as good as it could have been. Try to use appropriate ingredients when you can. So, I know, like, when I was living in Toronto, there were lots of and that was a long time ago, there were a lot of really good homebrew shops where I could get German malts for my German beers. I get English malts for my English beers. I just always tried to keep it as, true to the style as I could from an ingredients perspective. If you can, just learn about the differences in the malts that you're using. It's funny because when I started, I try and taste the malts, and I couldn't really figure out what it was I was tasting. And now, if you give me 2 Pilsner malts, I can probably tell you the difference between them, sadly. But it's because I know the maltsters now, but I have my preferences in the ones I lean to and the ones that I don't. And freshness matters. Brew to your preference. So I usually won't brew a beer that I don't like. So if it's a style that I won't drink, I won't brew it. So from a competition perspective, it's things that I want because I want to have them at home. I want to be able to drink them. And I find that I'm just more passionate about them when I do that. Taste grains, talked about that. So yeah, tasting grains is neat. If you do it and then you drink your beer, you start being able to sort of tie together those, pre-brew day ingredients to the final product. And it starts helping you, it starts to inform your process in terms of how you make beers going forward. So the next beer you make, you might have an idea that, nah, I didn't like how that malt turned out in this beer. I'm going to try a different version of it or a different malt store. I'm not even going to use it at all. Share your plan before you brew and share your beer after you package it. So, let people know what you're going to do. You talk to your friends, but then share your beer after and get feedback. I think it's so important. And just keep rebrewing it till you get the beer that you want. And I remember when I was in Oakville, the one I sort of locked in on wanting to make a special bitter. And so I made it like 5 times in a row until I finally got what I wanted. And now I just sort of have that recipe locked in. It's what I use. But doing it sort of iteratively like that allowed me to sort of compare them better and then get to the beer that I wanted to get to. And my friends didn't have a problem coming over and drinking it anyway. Just sort of some competition tips for anybody who's, thinking about getting into competitions. I think you guys have some, really good participation from a competition perspective. Going to Brewer of the Year, see when competitions are scheduled to happen. That's what I do, so I know when things are going to happen. What beers do you want to put in to the competition for the year? So I think most competitions now have 6 to 8, a limit of 6 to 8. So you can sort of plan around that for the year. So you figure out what style, this is what I do. I figure out what styles I want to work on, and then I start building sort of my arsenal of beers I'm going to start sending to competitions. Don't let judge feedback from one comp discourage you or change your approach. Give a beer 3 to 4 competitions before you toss it or think it's the best beer ever. Because there just is a lot of variance in judging across the country, which isn't a bad thing. There seems to be these sort of regional preferences. At least that's what I see in the feedback forms that I get. But definitely, I've had people crap all over a beer, and then, the next competition, it wins best in show. And you're like, well, what the hell's going on? So you got to give them a few to really figure out what it is that you have on your hands. Share your beer and get feedback from the people that you trust and make sure they're honest. I mean, I always tell people when I give them a beer of mine, I say, look, don't worry about telling me you don't like it. I'd prefer it if you did. It's not about hurting my feelings, but helping me make a better beer. And I might not agree with you anyway, but I want to know what you honestly think. And I think sometimes people are a little bit nervous about telling you they don't like your beer. And I try to get rid of that as much as possible. Join Twitter. Absolutely 100%. It's a lot of fun. And follow me and I'll follow you back. And like I said, you can just direct message me whenever you want to talk beer. I have lots of people that send me random notes. And I love it. Anyway, I have all the time in the world for people who have questions about it. So feel free. From a competition perspective, just set goals. For me, when I moved here, it was I wanted to win a gold. Just get a gold medal. That was sort of the first thing I wanted to try and do. And then it was, maybe I could try and win a best of show. And then it was landing the top 20, top 10, top 5, and what have you. So just setting goals is fun. It's, it's a fun thing with this. If you don't have a lot of beer storage space, just make smaller batches. I know some people keg, some people bottle. If you bottle especially, you can make smaller batches and you don't have to have as many bottles, so it makes your life a little bit easier. If you don't have a lot of time to brew and you want a competition brew, some advice I got from a brewer a long time ago was just brew stronger beers that age well. You can put them in a freezer, not a freezer somewhere, but in your cooler or your fridge somewhere. You can leave them and let them age and they'll just get better, and then you can send them in. So, I do that once in a while as well. If you don't have enough kegs, if you are kegging, just bottle off some of your beers and then reload with another set of, just reload that keg up. Brew with people, I'll always be learning. So, I get a bit sheepish sometimes when people ask me for advice because I still think I'm learning a lot. I don't feel that I know enough. So I'm always trying to learn things. I'm always brewing with different people because everybody has something to offer in terms of how they do things and different approaches to making beer. So it's just, a big piece of advice would be never think you know a lot. Always sort of come at it that there's something to learn from everybody and everything that you're doing. That's it. I don't know how fast I blasted through that deck, but if anybody has questions, whether it's recipe design, home brewing, competitions, or what have you, let me have it.
Thanks for that, Cory. I don't know if there's anybody out there who's got questions. Eric, let me unmute you too. Oh, wait, hold on. Eric has a question. Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to ask, so you said you have preferences on ingredients.
Yeah.
What are the ones that you keep on hand because you know you're going to use them? Like malt stir and everything.
Yeah, so for Pilsner, I use Best Malts Pils. Of all the Pilsner malts I've used, that's the one I like the best and I use the most. So I keep that on hand. I have standard, like raw or 2-row. And then I found some floor malted Maris Otter that I really like. So usually I keep those on hand all the time. And then I'll order some weird specialty malts. Funny enough, they usually come from Ontario. Like Wireman Caramber, I really, for some reason, can't get enough of. Red X is a really neat ingredient that I think sort of people haven't played with enough yet, and when they start, they'll like it. And then I think for a grain, I think that's probably about it. The one yeast I'd say that I really love, it's never out because it's one of those private collections from Y Yeast, is Y Yeast 1217, which funny enough is out this quarter for the next 3 months. And if anybody, sees it or they get their hands on it, I would strongly recommend it. It is just the best yeast, super easy to work with, and it makes killer beers.
Cory, we had a question come in through the chat asking about what is your brew setup? And then Steve, I'll get to you.
Okay. My brew setup is varied. So I have a Blickman sort of top tier, one of those tower things with like 3 burners on it. And then I also have a cooler that I use. So some days I'll do no sparge brewing. So I can do sort of I only need 2 burners to do that, or 2 vessels to do that. So I'll sort of do 2 beers at the same time. And then last year I won a Grainfather as a, best of show prize. So I've been using that more now, primarily just because it's easier to get up in the morning and time it and have it go. But some days I'll do 2. So if I'm doing 1 beer now, it seems like I'm using the Grainfather the most, but I don't actually boil in the Grainfather. So I find that the boiling sucks in that thing. So what I'll do is I'll mash in it, and then I'll move it over to one of my pots on a burner, and then I'll boil it there. So I'll use it as a mash vessel, which I find it works really, really good as.
I'm going to let Steve ask a question. Then I got Xander and Rob on deck. So Steve, this is yours here. Oh, where'd you go? Hold on. There you are. Go ahead, Steve. Oh, wait.
There we go. I'm good. So when you say that you're iteratively working through any of your recipes, doing it again and again and again, and improving it, what types of things are you detecting, and what are you actually tweaking? Like, how are you reacting to the things that you're picking up on?
Right. So it depends on what it is, right? So if it's a process fault, then I'll catch that right away, right? And so I don't have a lot of process. I got the process down pretty good, so I usually don't have that. Usually doesn't come up too much. So a lot of times I'm going through the process and I'll make choices around, well, I'm going to use this hop instead of that hop, this yeast instead of that yeast. And then I'll make notes in the recipe design tool on, here's the one I used, here's the one I thought about. And then when I'm tasting the beer, I'm thinking, I don't like the way this yeast came out, right? It didn't hit it the way I wanted it to. So I'm going to use the other yeast. I'll keep everything the same, and I'll use the other yeast next time. And then I'll taste it. Or if the hops aren't right, just like that, right? I'll start isolating for 1 or 2 things. And do I like the hop profile or don't I? Do I like the bitterness profile or don't I? And then I start asking myself those questions and going through. And then if the answer is no, this isn't bitter enough, or this, whatever it is, and I just start changing it. And I say, okay, I'll make notes. Next time you brew, modify, back off the IBU by 3. Do this, and I'll start making notes as I'm tasting it. And then you'll find that over a couple months of tasting it, the other thing is the beer changes. And then you're like, no, I thought back the IBU's off. No, it's perfect. 2 months. And then I'll put in the changes. But I just try to sort of isolate out the difference of the beer. Did that answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, Steve's good. I'll unmute Xander, and Xander, you can go ahead.
Oh, hey. I was wondering, when you're doing a competition, how many bottles do you usually, or different kinds of beers would you submit per competition? Do you like to cap yourself out because you don't want to overwhelm yourself, or just kind of go nutso?
Well, most of the competitions have limits now, right? So I'll just max out on whatever the limit is. So if the limit's 6, 8, or 10, and I'll do it like back I don't know, like 3 or 4 years ago, before I won it, or even I think probably the year before I won it the first time, every competition didn't have any limits on it. So, everybody was sending like 30 or 40 beers, and I sort of tapped out at like 25 or something. But then I figured out that, some beers sort of double in terms of what you can send them as. You can send them as different things, and you can get sort of different feedback off it. So you can do it that way as well. And that was really the only way to compete for Brewer of the Year, was to sort of figure out what those tricks were and how to do that. So now it's a lot easier because it doesn't take as much to send in. You don't have to deal with it as much. So, like, I hate bottling. I just want to shoot myself in the head every time I have to bottle. It's the worst thing in the world to do. So, so the limits of 6 are, the limits of 6 to 10 now are like perfect for me. So I'll do, because I'll go through and sort of, and it's funny because I'm not a big drinker. I don't drink very much at all. I have very little alcohol tolerance. So, as the days go or as the weeks go by, I'll sort of just do small samples of the beers and figure out where they're at in their aging process. And then I'll figure out which are the ones that I want to send.
Sweet.
Awesome. We had a question come through on the chat. I think Joss had a question regarding when you're testing a recipe, what's the batch size that you're brewing?
That's a good question. So if I'm really worried about it and I think it's going to be like a home run or a complete, nightmare, then I'll do a 3-gallon batch. If anything else, like usually I pretty much have a good handle on it now, it'll be a 5-gallon batch. So the ones where I'm experimenting, though, are usually 3-gallon. And then if it works, I'll scale it up for the next time I brew it.
All right, cool. And just could you repeat the Y yeast again, Cory? There's a bunch of people in the chat who were curious about it.
It's Y yeast 1217. I think it's called like American IPA or something.
Okay.
So it says West Coast. It says PC West Coast IPA.
West Coast IPA. That's it. Yeah, it is it's awesome. It's in terms of those American yeast, I would say it's the best. It's the best one.
Wow. Okay. We have another question coming in from Rob. So Rob, you should be unmuted now, I hope. Let me see.
There's a few Robs. We should probably specify that.
Rob Forum. Sorry. Rob Fortum.
Hi. So I guess my question is a little bit of a two-parter, but one, have you ever gotten any feedback from a competition where the judges like just totally didn't get your beer, or it was like they were judging a beer from a different planet than what you had thought you had entered? And then secondarily, what sort of feedback are you looking for from judges in terms of things that are both helpful for you, or do you find the input that they provide to you particularly valuable?
Yeah, good question. So the first one first, the funny answer is yeah. I'll get feedback on I've had feedback on beers, and I'll read the feedback and I'll think like, are you high? What are you talking about? There's no way that's my beer. Cause I'll just know. I'm like what happened? Was there a bottle mix up? And then, I'll swear for a couple of days and say, this is idiots and whatever. But it does happen. Right. And the thing is, it can happen for a lot of different reasons. Like I usually just assume that, there's no way there's diacetyl in my beer. You don't know what you're talking about, whatever. Right. And I know I didn't send one with it. But then, maybe someone sat it by a heater. They saw my name on a label and they say, hey, we'll sit these ones by the heater and we'll leave it there for a few days. So, there's possible that. So it does happen, and I think some competitions are more prone to it than others. But I think, I always also look at who's judging my beer. Because the feedback, if it's somebody who hasn't, isn't a certified judge or is just like a volunteer, I'm going to be a little more, I don't know the right word, lenient, I guess, on how I'm reflecting on that feedback. I don't know if I'm going to trust it as much, right? But if it's consistent, so to the second part of your question, what do I look for and how do I adjust beer going forward? I don't do it off of one set of feedback. So I'll look, like I said earlier, take 3 or 4 competitions and then sort of take the aggregate of that feedback and look at it and look for common themes. So that's really what I started looking for. Because if I was joking about, there's no diacetyl in my beer, but if in 4 competitions I get the same feedback, this thing's a diacetyl bomb, then I'm gonna say, okay, no, well, fine, right? I gotta fix this, and that's the problem. So I don't look for one specific thing. I look for, or from one competition, I'm not looking for feedback. It is that sort of aggregate piece, because that's where you'll get the best feedback. You'll start seeing the trends. Because the thing is, somebody will score one beer of 40. I had a judge score an Irish Red of 50 once. And I thought, how can that be 50? And then in the next competition, it got 30. But the feedback was essentially the same, right? So you got to also sort of take that calibration of how people score things and really just read the feedback and see what they're saying. What's the general gist of the beer? But definitely do it over a minimum of 3, ideally 4 competitions, and say, okay, this is the feedback I'm getting from people who know what they're talking about from beer. They probably have their own different preferences on what they think the style should be, but here are the common themes I'm picking up, and I agree with them or don't I agree with them? Because that's the other question, right? Do you agree or don't you agree? Because you still got to make the beer that you want, right? So if I buy in and I say, yeah, you know what, that's probably fair, right? I'm not gonna take it personally. That's a fair comment. Then I'll start adjusting. Like, it's too much roast in your Schwartz beer or something, and everybody's saying it. Then maybe I got to come to terms with, I'm over hogging this thing with black mold or something. Does that answer your question, Rob?
Looks like it does.
Rob's good. I got another question from Daryl Kelly.
Hey, Daryl.
Hey, Cory, just a quick, pretty easy question. How many kegs you got in your setup? It seems like you always, for what you're doing, you'd have to have a lot of kegs.
Yeah, I do. I have, and I think the numbers are going to get right. I have 6 3-gallon kegs and have 13 5-gallon kegs.
And you're able to keep them all cold all the time?
Yeah. It's gotten out of hand, man. You know how it goes. So I got keezers and fridges and commercial stuff that I found off Kijiji that I can, like the pop cooler things you can, the sliding doors and those sorts of things. So I think I have 3. I think I got 1 big fridge. I got 1 keezer, and then I got 1 of those pop things that holds like 6 kegs in it.
I feel like we got to see a walkthrough video.
Yeah, so I don't have any problem keeping it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of these days. Not today. I brewed yesterday, not today. But it's, I don't have, and I won't brew it if I can't keep it cold, right? So depending on what it is. So it's weird because over the years I've gotten so good at managing this inventory of all these different beers that it's just, I know when something's going to kick and I have, plans lined up to, when I'm going to replace it. And, and then I'll toss beers if they suck, right? I won't cling to a beer hoping it's going to be something it's not. If I screw the beer over, then I'm not going to stick with it. I'll redo it right when I do it. I'm over it.
And you keep them all at different like carbs that you have set up to do like.
Yeah, I have a couple with dual regulators on it. So, funny enough, a lot of the beers that I brew are sort of in, if I have 2, let's say I got 2 English beers with the same regulator, and I'll usually sort of plan it out that way. And Belgian beers, like the high carbonation ones, like Belgian beers, I don't keg anyway. I'll do those in bottles, all bottles, because I think they're, again, try to be sort of true to the style. I just find it's better that way.
Thank you.
No sweat, buddy.
There we go. Now that's better. We had a couple questions come in from the chat. Mark wanted to know what your favorite style was to drink. So, what do you like drinking?
Okay, because I think seasonality probably plays a really big factor into it. So, right now, I'm sort of digging a lot of lighter styles. So, cold American lagers, cream ales. I made a Kentucky Common that I had yesterday that, it's funny because I didn't quite like the way it turned out stat-wise, but I put it in a keg and I left it and I forgot about it for a month. And then I was out barbecuing yesterday. I'm like, wow, I might as well try. I want to see what it's at. I was like, boy, this is good. So it's kind of all over the place, right? But right now it's the lighter beers, and then we get into fall. It starts moving into the Irish Reds, the English alt beers, things like that. So I just seem to be guilty of sort of that seasonal variations on what I like and when. But it's, I just find when I'm in a mood for a particular style of beer and then I have it, I just really appreciate drinking it. Whether I've made it myself or someone else has made it, as long as it's made well, just, sort of really taking in wow, this is really well done. And really enjoying it and appreciating it. So So it just depends because, you know, stout's not so hot on a 40-degree day. You know, I don't.
Yeah. It's true.
So it just depends. So I'm all over the place.
We had another question come in regarding bottle conditioning, and the question was, do you bottle condition for competition? Any specific styles, or is everything coming from the keg?
No, Belgian style. So if I'm gonna do if I'm gonna make a Belgian beer, I will bottle condition it. And I made an American barley wine with a couple of amberers last winter when it was really cold. And we bottle conditioned that one because we thought this thing's going to take forever to age. Because it was like, I think the original gravity was like 1.120. And it was a monster. So we thought, you know what, this is one we worked raw, and it was over 100 IBUs. We thought, you know what, this will be nice if we let this age for a bit. So that one we decided to for that reason. We just wanted to let it sit and let it sort of make itself awesome.
Nice. I'm gonna go back to the chat, not to the chat, but to the live stuff here. And then Cliff had a question, so I'm gonna unmute you now, Cliff. So you should be able to go. Give me a second. There you go.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for doing this, Cory. Question: since you've got so many kegs going on and everything else, you mentioned that you don't drink that much. I've got 2 small ones at home, so the amount that I can drink is way down too. How often do you brew? And what you mentioned?
So it's funny. It's funny. It's a common question. So though I don't drink very much, my friends drink quite a bit. And, you know, people come over all the time. And then, you know, it's funny because they don't come over. It's funny. Friends don't come over looking for beer. Friends come over and then they get beer pushed in their faces. So, you know, hey, try this. Tell me what you think. What do you think of this? What do you think of this? So I go through it a lot quicker than you'd think, which is odd because I don't drink that much. I mean, obviously it's funny because now with everybody being stuck at home, now I'm like, what am I gonna do with all this beer? So now I'm drinking a little bit more because I don't really have a choice. So that slows down my brewing quite a bit. So it depends because I can go like once a week. You know, so because when you think I got 16 kegs, and depending on how they turn over, and some of them don't turn out the way I want them to, other ones do. So it sort of depends on what's going on. But, you know, now what I'm trying to do, I try to go through these sort of sprints of brewing and then stopping. So like, I don't really want to brew when it's like 30 degrees out or above. I hate it. It's too hot. And then I don't want to brew in the winter because I don't feel like doing that either. So I'm trying to sort of try to time it out where I can sort of take some breaks and then but, you know, when I'm not in break mode, you know, I'll go nuts. I'll brew like 2 beers a week. So I'll do 2 at the same time and I'll just sort of crush it that way. And then I'll get my my kegs refilled and then, you know, brewing the style because I might do 3 of the same beer in a row, right? Because there are small changes I wanted to try. So I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do this beer, you know, 3 exactly the same malt bill. I'm going to use 3 different yeasts in it. Or I'm going to, you know, I'll pick a variable and I'll do it differently. And then I'll taste them all at the same time, aging at the same time. And then I'll say, this is the one. I like this one the best. And then that's the recipe. And then I'll have people come over or whatever, you know, I'll go to a Van Brewers meeting and then, you know, I'll take a bunch of them. That's the other thing is I'll go to a Van Brewers meeting and I'll just take, you know, it's a joke, but I always take my worst beers to the Van Brewers meeting because those are the ones I want the feedback on, or those, you know, somehow I find a way to get rid of this stuff.
Sorry, I was muted there. Thanks, Cory. We have a couple other questions in from the chat. And Josh, I know that you got a question here live, so I'll get to you in a second. We had a couple questions. One of them was, do you have a personal favorite beer that you regularly brew, like your pièce de résistance?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think. There's a couple of them that I like to have on tap all the time, just because I can always go to them and drink them. So I have like an American Blonde that I really like. So I just rebrewed that a week ago. I just love having that beer on tap. So that's probably the one that I have seasonally all on tap all the time. And the Kentucky Common I really like drinking that beer. I kind of get a kick out of historical beers. So that one seems to be one that's taken hold. And people come over and they're kind of like, you know, telling the story about a Kentucky Common and they want to know if they drink it and like, wow, this is pretty good. So I'd say those 2 are my 2 favorite go-to beers. Is that the question? The question is, what are my go-to beers? Right? Not for brewing, but for drinking? Or is it for brewing?
I think it was a little bit of both. It's like, do you have a personal favorite beer, right, that you regularly brew? And obviously, if you're regularly brewing the Kentucky Common and the blonde, American blonde that you normally do, then those would be the ones.
Yeah, I'd say those are probably the ones I do the most. I mean, they'll say recently I've sort of gotten hooked on making American lagers for some reason. So I don't know if it's just because of the heat and just sitting outside and barbecuing and having one of those, like, man, these are good. Why don't I have this on tap more often? So now I got like 2 kegs of those because everybody comes over and crushes those things too. So that be the new favorite. I don't know, because I think I've locked down a pretty good recipe for it. So now it's just a matter of sort of screwing around with it a bit, but I think I got what I want. So that one could be taking the lead pretty soon.
Yeah. A couple of yeast questions came in too. They wondered if you had a house yeast on hand that you use in a variety of brews, and do you have a preferred English style yeast or an English yeast strain?
English style. I'll start with the English style strain. I don't know why I keep getting caught on these private collection ones, because it ends up screwing me over because they're only around for so long. But Thames Valley 1 and 2, I find are really good yeasts. The 2 is the seasonal one. The other one that's really good is the West Yorkshire yeast. That one I find has a lot of versatility in it. It doesn't get a lot of play for some reason. Not a lot of people use it, but that's a really good yeast. That's if you kind of figure out the nuances of that thing in your system, that you're going to make some really good beers, especially like milds and other things. I find it's not so great in stouts, but in like milds and in bitters and things like that, I find all 3 of those make really, really exceptional beers. And then, the other one, what was the other question? So that was the English strain. And what was the other part of the question?
Is there a house strain? So do you have a house strain that you use?
No, I would say that if I could, it would be the 1217. That's probably one I'd run through everything. I really like the White Labs Mexican lager yeast. Oh, yeah. Even if you're not making an American lager, the Mexican lager yeast, I think it's like White Labs 940, I think. And it's funny because we started experimenting with it a couple of years ago. We started calling it the Mamba because it was like ripping through all these beers. And it didn't seem to matter what we put it in. It was making good versions of it. So I found it was really versatile and it was really forgiving. And so that was the house strain for a while. And then I think right now I've had terrible luck with dry yeasts. So I'm trying to sort of correct that. So I've been using a lot of Y yeast 189 right now, which so far I like. So that might be the house yeast soon. I think with the situation the way it is, having dry yeast on hand might need to be a smart move strategically.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to Josh here. So Josh, you'll be unmuted in a second, and you can go. Go ahead.
So hey, Cory, thanks for joining us tonight. One of the questions that I just wanted to ask you is, what are some of your recommendations for craft breweries in Vancouver or BC for that matter? I seem to make my way out to Vancouver at least once or twice a year for work, and just wanted to check out some new places other than Powell Street, Storm. Like, what do you like in Van City?
So here's a weird, what kind of beer do you want to drink when you go out drinking?
I like NEPAs. I like sours. Okay. Pretty much NEPAs, sours. Not really big into stouts or anything like that.
Okay, so one of the, and I don't know, I'd call it one of Vancouver's best kept secrets is Boombox Brewing. If you like any IPAs, that is, Kent is a former van brewer, and the beers that they make are just out. The best way to describe it is they sort of started up in this co-op brewery where they pay in and they could sort of brew twice a month or something, or they have 2 beers on tap until it was gone they could brew. And basically their beers were so good that people were lining up when their beers were on tap to get it, and they would sell out right away. They couldn't keep it in stock. And he just, he's got kids, he didn't want to go into the big brewery and do all that sort of thing. So he's been sort of, I don't know what contract brewing to some degree, but he sort of landed at Parallel 49. And he's got a really good arrangement there where they're really able to sort of start making the beers that they want to make. It's a team of them. But I'd say number one, boombox brewing is something that if you guys ever see it out there in Toronto, get your hands on it. And if you're out here, go seek it out. It's downtown. And the other thing I would recommend is if you're out here, if you can make your way out, there's an area called Brewers Row and a small town called Port Moody. It's just maybe 30 minutes outside of Vancouver.
Port Moody.
And there's four literally next door to each other. And Twin Sails Brewing is really, they're doing some really crazy things. They sort of started as a German brewery making like just really to style German. And then they sort of opened it up into all these crazy IPAs and pale ales and all this neat stuff. And then there's like I said, there's 3 breweries, right? And there's Yellow Dog right beside them, which is really great, high quality. And then finally Four Winds. I don't know if you guys get Four Winds out there. They're in sort of a different direction. They're on their own. They make a lot of sours and their sours are like, and they're really highly regarded here in BC. It's one of the like the top tier craft breweries out here. They just make ridiculous stuff.
Yeah, I've never seen anything from Four Winds make its way out here, or even like, no, I just haven't. You said Boombox Brewing is, are they strictly like contract brewing, or they're brewed under contract, or do they have?
No, they got a slightly different setup there now. Like that's, and I don't know exactly what it is. They sort of bounced around and did some contract brewing, and then they landed them and Parallel 49. I don't know what the arrangement is, but they came to an arrangement where they're working and selling and brewing out of their facility now. So it's sort of like a step up for them. So I wouldn't quite call them a contract brewer anymore because that's their location too. So they have merchandise and all that sort of stuff there. They're not partners because they're quite small, but I don't know quite what the arrangement is, but man, they make good beer.
Okay. Thanks, Cory.
Yeah, there we go. Unmute myself. We got another question coming from Ian. So Ian, let me unmute you and you could ask your question. Go ahead. You should be, hold on. You should be good now. Ian, hello? I don't know if he's still there. Ian, are you there?
I see him, but he's still muted.
Is he? Oh, that's
Yep.
weird.
There we go.
Myself earlier. Sorry.
There you
Hi,
go.
Cory.
Hey, Ian.
Just a quick question. I guess you talk about this iterative approach where you're always making small incremental changes as you brew. Is there a point where you just can't stop winning with the beer that you just stop? Or do you always make those changes? Like, do you go to, like, is there a time where you've made that change and you like it more, but the judges all of a sudden are like, hey, so you step back and start brewing it the other way? I was just wondering how that.
Yeah, it does. It does because it depends, right? Like I do a lot of brewing for competitions and that in mind, but at some point, it's when people come over, what sort of, what am I happiest with, right? So I'll keep screwing with something enough till I screw it up, and then I'm like, okay, I gotta go back. The last version was the best version. So I always push it too far. So I always end up ruining it at some point, and then I say, okay, I gotta go back to the way it was, right, and make it that way. So I sort of always assume the process and everything works out. So the variable is only the ingredients. And then, so yeah, I do it all. So to answer your question, Ian, I do it all the time. I always push it too far, and then I got to dial it back and say, okay, this is it. And then any other changes, and then I'll go back to it and I'll screw with it later. But usually what will happen is if a beer is really successful in the competition, at some point I just sort of retire it and say, okay, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to put something else in now. Right. I mean, that was sort of the advantage of having the no limits was you can just throw everything out, all your experimental stuff and everything, and get feedback and figure out what was going to work and what wasn't. Now you got to be a little more selective with it. So there's pros and cons to it. But yeah, I just get curious, right? And I'll go on like a bender on hops or on yeast. Usually it's yeast, excuse me. I'll say, oh, I got to try that yeast on this recipe. And then I'll put the yeast in, like, oh, that didn't work at all. Or it worked really well, or sometimes I just don't know really how to get the most out of a yeast. So, but that's usually where my downfall is usually on yeast and over experimenting because I had a kick out of it.
Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, Eric, did we have a question from Rob and Sandra?
Yeah, they just had one posted in the chat now. Why don't we do that one?
Sure.
Hey, Cory, if you were stuck on a desert island, what beer would you wish you had with you? Choose one only.
If I only had, it was only one. Probably Fuller's London Pride. I can always drink those.
Awesome.
I can get behind that. I also had a question come from the chat asking what would be the best advice you can give to a new brewer?
The best advice I'd give to a home brewer in terms of making good beer would be, invest in a way to control your temperature of your fermentation. Have oxygen. Make sure that you have a way to introduce oxygen into your beer outside of shaking it. There's usually 3, and I can't remember what the third one is right now, but I'd say if you're a new brewer, for me, when I started taking it seriously and trying to really improve my beer, those were 2 really big steps in making better beer. And then I guess the third one would be the things that I'm talking about around, making notes and paying attention to what you're doing, and not skimping on the process. No, you know what? Yeah, the best advice I'd give is read my presentation.
So I saw a question from Joss that got buried a little bit. So I was going to repeat that one while David's still on mute. So Joss said, do you ever harvest yeast, and do you use fresh yeast for each batch?
That's a good question. So because I harvest yeast is the best way to put it. And what I'll do is, because I brew so frequently, I'll plan based on a strain. So I'll sort of plan out what I want to pitch. I'll say, well, if it's a lager yeast that I haven't been able to get my hands on, instead of having to order it fresh a bunch of different times, I'll plan the next 3 beers based on that yeast. And I usually do it that way. So I definitely harvest it. 'Cause I don't know. I find the results are great, and I'm saving a bit of money. So why wouldn't I do it?
And what's your yeast harvesting strategy? Like, do you do it from the fermenter? Do you make an extra big starter?
Well, I make a big starter. So usually I pitch big. I almost always pitch big. I've never over pitched. So, I think we brew at such a small scale. I don't think there's a huge risk of it. And then, so I'll pitch big. And then once it's done, I have the SS BrewTech brew buckets. So once I rack off it, I got everything down at the bottom there. And then I'll take that. I'll just take it right out of the fermenter.
I see Mark Hubbard asked a question for the second time, so I think I have to ask that one next. Have you ever considered going pro in any way, not just starting your own brewery, but some other way?
Yeah, I've thought about it, but I always have to have a hobby. So the problem is that if I went brewing, started my own brewery or whatever, then I have to go find another hobby. And this one seems to be pretty good. I've looked at starting breweries and doing stuff like that. I've even talked to investors and had some different opportunities that way. But I think right now the challenges from a marketplace perspective is it's so saturated, especially I don't really know what the scene's like in Toronto, but I think it's almost as bad as it is here, where there's just, I live in a really small town, like you say, the equivalent of Oakville population wise, and there's like 7 breweries, right? Just in that local area. So local has sort of gone from your provincial brewery to your municipal brewery. And I think, it's just a hard way to make a living. The business model has to change a little bit. So I'd love to do it. To be honest with you, it'd be a blast to do, especially someone like me who's a little bit OCD and sort of throw myself at something like that. But, the other thing is you got responsibilities like kids and family. You got to be responsible. So I've thought about it, toy with it. I think right now is sort of a dream and something I sort of enjoy thinking about every once in a while. But I do pretty well for myself, so I got to take all that into consideration.
As long as I'm the one picking questions for another round. I see Rick Hurtfloats, sorry if I butchered your last name, is asking about Lodo brewing and all the manifesto that came along with that. Did you adopt anything from that, and what's your overall thought?
So one of the homebrewers at Van Brewers, one of the really good homebrewers here, he really, I don't know if I'd say he lives and dies by it, but he does a lot of the Lodo stuff. So he pre-boils the water right before he's brewing, and then he cools it right down to get all the oxygen out of it. Uses sodium metabisulfite and all these other things. And so I picked up a few of some of it, I guess. I'll use the SMB in the mash, a little bit of it, to try and sort of scavenge some of the oxygen. I've also started screwing around with not crash cooling and seeing how that impacts the beer, because, as the liquid cools, when you're transferring it, the chance of it picking up more oxygen is going to be higher. So I'm sort of playing with that right now to see, can I still get clear beers? Because there's going to be a lot more yeast in suspension when you're doing it that way. So I'm sort of playing with that right now. But right now it's an experiment. I'm just going to sort of see how the results bear out, but I haven't fully adopted it. But where it's convenient, I've picked up a few tricks here or there.
So it looks like David stepped away. So I'm not able to unmute anyone if anyone does have a verbal question. But oh, he's back. But there was a question about, are you always able to decide which iteration of a beer you want to go? So say you have 2, maybe 3 different versions of the same beer. Like, how do you taste them to decide which one to go?
Yeah, I know once I start tasting them, because I'll know what the variable is. So it's sort of like, you're tasting something, you just pick out the difference. So if it's like a hop, if I'm screwing with the hops, you can sort of pick up how the hops are impacting the beer. And, is the bitterness too harsh, or how smooth is it? What flavor am I getting? So just depending on the variable, I sort of know exactly what I'm after. So I'm not comparing the whole beer when I'm doing it that way. I'm just comparing really specific components of the beer, and then figuring out which one do I like more. But then I also give it time. I don't taste it once, say that's the one. I know that's the one I want. I'll give it a month or 2, and I'll taste it and go back, give them the right amount of time to figure out what's the right one. But I always know, and a lot of it's based on my preference. So it's like, this is what I wanted. This is how I envisioned the beer. This got me closer to the beer. And it's funny because it's a group of homebrewers. I'm sure everybody can sort of relate to it a little bit. But when you think about the beer, like when I think about a recipe, I'm saying I'm going to add this ingredient. I'm tasting it in my head, right? I can sort of imagine what the taste and what the flavor is going to be, and I'm sort of comparing all that stuff. So then when it comes to actually tasting the final product, it's getting bumped up against what I originally was trying to get to, what I wanted.
That's good. I know that there's been some questions about pitch size for yeast. How big is big, I guess, is the question. And I know that'll depend on whether it's an ale or whether it's a lager, but.
Yeah, and I don't have the exact metrics, but I mean, because I use Brewer's Friend for the pitch rates. And so it'll show you like what's a big pitch and what's a big pitch for an ale and what's a big pitch for a lager. So I sort of just use those metrics. Say, okay, well, I'm just going to go whole hog. I'll be at the minimum, I'll be at the biggest level for things. And I'll just sort of do it that way. So I just try to, pitch huge. Not, say huge. I mean, I pitch large. So I'll do, like an example would be if for the blonde, I used a 3-liter starter with 2 packs of 1272.
Wow. That's big. That's big. I don't know if is there any other questions? I don't see any, Eric.
I see Attila has asked about 3 Dogs Brewing a few times. So he wants to know what you think of 3 Dogs Brewing in Vancouver.
I've never had them. And that's the thing, right? I don't go out and drink that much, and I got like 20 kegs in my garage, so I got work to do there. So I don't usually get out and try a lot unless people recommend it and say you gotta try this. So unfortunately I don't have a good handle on that one.
Okay.
Any more hand raisers? It's been a while
since more questions, folks? Yeah.
Sounds like we're wrapping up.
Wrap up I'll stop the recording, but we can continue, obviously. So.
Yeah, so pretty much right on schedule, I think.